Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Today's Medical Sales Leader. And this time, I have a really special episode for you. A dear friend of mine, Matt Zaun, who is a story strategist who has taught thousands of people how to meaningfully tell and master storytelling, has actually joined me live in person in the studio so he can go through not just the what is important about storytelling, but also the how. So welcome, sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and we're glad you're here.
Here with Claire Davis, and here's what is so important. So Claire, I've referred to you numerous times as the word architect because you know the different words that land. And there's so many people out there, and they quickly learn that writing a resume is a perishable skill. It's not like when you learn how to ride a bike and then you don't ride a bike for a decade and you can hop back on. People quickly find out the hard way that resumes change, right? There's different elements that in the workplace change. And often people will get into a job and they don't think about resumes because they don't need to. And then when they need to think about it the most, they go into panic mode. So I'm excited that we can dive through some of these frequently asked questions you get regarding resumes that is gonna really help a lot of people. So let's start with, is a resume just about wins? Is it just about someone touting their wins? If so, is that enough?
That's such a good question, and I love starting here. The reason is, if we look back historically at how resumes were in 1995, in the early 2000s, you're probably imagining something that was a black and white document with your name at the top, probably a line underneath it, and then a laundry list of your accomplishments. And if you were really on your game, the laundry list also included numbers. So that's how resumes really used to be. And while there's nothing wrong with that or the majority of that, what I would say is that resumes have really come a long way. And what I find is that when people are writing down their wins on a resume, it's such a great thing to do. However, we have to remember that if we're going to compare ourselves to other candidates just based on our wins, we're being compared apples to apples. So what we like to do, and what my team likes to do, is we like to make you the orange. And what I mean is, we don't just stop at the historical wins. There's actually a lot of different nuances there that can really help to tell the story so that it connects not just with you being amazing in your career, but also with the challenges that the company you're targeting is actually facing. So a couple of those things that you can do that go beyond just listing the wins are to tell your story. So a great resume is a combination of what I call our triple S strategy. It's your story, your style, and your statistics. And if you have those statistics already, it's great. One next step that people can take is really to make sure that the statistics or the metrics that they're sharing about their career success are the ones that are going to matter to the employer that they're targeting. Case in point, a lot of times I work with people who they're kind of on the fence between, they've got wonderful wins as a sole contributor. So they're in sales, they're great at selling a product into a doctor or a hospital. That's amazing. And then at some point along the line, they've decided to manage people, or they've been in charge of a team, or they've led a sprint to a product launch. So those are two very different wins. And so depending on what you're looking at doing for your next career, if you are looking at being a sole contributor again, you really do want to focus on those independent wins. You know, how do you individually contribute to the conversion of business and sales? But if you decide that, hey, I want to manage and lead people, that's a little bit of a different conversation. So then you're going to want to transition and kind of cherry pick the different metrics that you're sharing based on how you help other people succeed and win. So that's really a little bit more than just the wins, but I guarantee you that when you start to position yourself this way, you do become an obvious choice. And the reason is you're going beyond just historical numbers, and you're really connecting with why you are obviously the choice for the one that they need to solve their problems at that specific company.
Okay, so let's say someone does all of that.
Yeah.
Is the resume going to guarantee them the job? Is that all they need?
I really wish that the answer was yes. I think that what can happen is sometimes we really belabor the resume process. I mean, it does take a significant amount of time to go back through your career history and to dig up what's made you great. But the thing is, even when you get that incredible document together, you got the story on there, you're talking about your wins as they're relevant to the target company that you have. The thing is, it's one point on the strategy, and the strategy really takes a multiple points so that you are making inroads with that company. So some of the other things that you would need would be making sure your LinkedIn profile is ready to go. And if you had asked me 15 years ago when I was a recruiter if LinkedIn was even part of the equation here, I would have told you no. I would have said it's against the rules and they're not supposed to look at you online and they shouldn't, and don't worry about it. But in today's world, it's a given. So in addition to your resume, you do need some other tools in your tool belt, to be exact. So you'll want to make sure that you have your LinkedIn profile brushed up and representing who you are as an incredible professional. And you also want to make sure that you have a really strong follow-up and a really strong networking strategy. And the reason I mention these is that if you're in sales, if you're listening to the podcast, you know we help you to really make sure you're mastering your medical sales career. And you're gonna start to recognize, well, hey, that sounds a lot like how I would develop business should I be entering a new territory. And that's exactly it. So imagine you would go after a target customer and try to make a big sale by using a lot of different components, including outreach, including email, including the materials that you bring, and meeting people in person. So consider the very same strategy when it comes to your job search. You need a resume, you need a LinkedIn profile, cover letters are important, portfolios are important. You even want to make sure that you're networking regularly, even when you're happily employed.
So let's say someone does all of that and they start sending it out to company after company, and then they come to find out that it's not working for them. So what do you say to people that tell you, all I want is a generic resume, but for whatever reason it's not working? Why is that the case?
I think this happens all the time. And where we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace is the fact that as human beings, we are wired for stability. So when we're looking to market a product or ourselves in the job search, what happens is we don't want to limit any opportunities out there. So we don't want to say I'm only open to or I'm only focusing on a specific area, because we might think, well, shoot, that means I'm going to be, not open to 80% of the opportunities that I otherwise could be. But that's actually a very good thing, and here's why. When it comes to marketing, whether it's you or a product, the most effective marketing strategy is a targeted one. So you really do need to know your customer and what they're worried about. What's keeping them up at night. You want to think about what are the challenges that the hiring team is looking to solve by bringing you on board in the first place, and what do you have to offer a specific market? Because when you come from that angle, suddenly you're not just another candidate, and you're not making the hiring manager have to work so hard to connect the dots on whether you are the right person or not. So going in with a very targeted resume is how I would recommend everybody go about their job search. It's going to save you a ton of time, and it's going to get you out of the pool of consideration and into the pool of obvious choice, because you're speaking to that exact employer.
So you mentioned statistics earlier in the conversation. A lot of people want things to be measured when it comes to resumes, but what are some other things that can be measured besides simply a quota?
So recently I put together my top 50 things that you can measure other than quota. And so anybody listening who's thinking, oh my gosh, Claire, I know I need to put numbers on this document, but I don't have great numbers, or it wasn't my best quarter, or, our organization doesn't really give me information like that. And I remember this one woman I was working with, and she was working for one of the larger catering companies, and she had she had access to who her targets were, but the company didn't actually give her the sales numbers after she had made the sales. So it was just sort of how the company was set up. So she comes to me and she says, well, what on earth am I supposed to measure? There are a variety of things. First of all, go after the numbers and the sales numbers and the business development numbers with all you've got. If you have the opportunity to connect with somebody in finance, please do yourself a favor and go after those numbers. Often this is also a good networking opportunity where you can reach out to former colleagues, where you're able to ask them, hey, do you remember how we were doing that quarter? Can you share some numbers on that? It's a great time to do that. But say you don't have access to any numbers at all. Other things you can measure are the other ways you've impacted the business. So for example, if you are the type where you are connecting with physicians in the field, how many physicians have you been able to connect with? What did it look like, the business, in terms of the business? What did it look like when you came on the scene versus how it looks like now? Did you bring a certain number of major academic centers on board? Or maybe did you make inroads with a couple of really tricky hospital systems and you were able to get in there? You can also talk about timing. So how much time did it take you to close that sale or to get that enterprise deal from introduction to signing on the dotted line? So there are a lot of different things we can measure, and it really does help, because the secret is 99% of people are still measuring just the sales development numbers. So if you also take the time to measure those additional things, it's going to help you a ton when it comes to standing out from the competition.
So speaking of additional things, let's say someone wants to bring a little bit of their personality into their resume.
Yeah.
They want to make it less boring. What would you recommend they do to make a resume less boring?
So I, after looking at 16,000 resumes myself, Matt, I can tell you that I've seen a lot of things on the document. And the ones that are the most memorable are the ones that make a really good go at tying their story to the mission of the job. So in this case, if you feel like your resume is boring, usually what's happening is that you're either writing what everybody else says, which is very common, or you're not bringing your personal effect into the document. So here's the thing. Feel free to not, don't beat yourself up about it. Because what happens is we think, oh gosh, well, if we're in this specific industry, we should really be talking about these specific things. We talk about our sales experience in terms of this, and we use these words and all the industry vernacular. But what happens is we end up sounding like everybody else. And now with AI on the scene, let me just tell you that resumes are all starting to bleed into the vanilla, right? So what do? What you do is you talk about who you are and why you chose this profession as it's relevant to your target. So maybe you really are fired up about the diabetes industry because you were born with type 2. Right? Or maybe you're passionate about being in breast cancer diagnostics because sadly, you lost a family member or a loved one because they ended up going down with that kind of a disease. So what I'd say is think back through your career about what is something that really hit the ignition switch and said, okay, not only am I going to pursue it, this is why it interests me, but this is why I'm going to stay. If you incorporate some of these things, these little elements of storytelling, these little elements of who you are, your resume is not only going to be more interesting to read, but more memorable for your interviewer too.
That is so many good points laid out. I appreciate you sharing that. I think it'd be good to dive deeper into the storytelling aspect of resumes, but that's gonna have to wait until the next frequently asked question episode that we do. So until then, we'll go from there.
Sounds good. See you in the next one.